Good evening and welcome to this discussion. I am Vijeta, Program Manager Education at India Bioscience and an Associate Editor of I Wonder. I Wonder is a science magazine for middle and high school teachers. It features writings about the many dimensions of teaching and learning of science in class and outside it. It is published twice a year in English, Hindi, and Kannada. If you are a practicing teacher, we invite you to write for us. To do this, send us your idea in about 100 words to iwonder@apu.edu.in. If you are interested to receive updates about our future webinars, our latest issues, or receive a free print version of our magazine, remember to subscribe to us by visiting our website. You can also follow us on Facebook. To increase our engagement with our readers, we invite the authors of an article from the magazine for an interactive discussion on the second Wednesday of every month. Today's discussion is part of that series. It is also the first webinar from our latest issue, which is a special issue focused on the pandemic. For those of you who haven't subscribed yet, this issue contains 13 articles, each of which has been written to answer questions that we have gathered from science teachers and teacher educators from the Azim Premji Foundation. The issue also has 21 snippets which look at the evidence behind some common myths surrounding COVID-19. It also has 2 posters and 1 booklet. Our speaker today is Somdatta Karak, who is the author of the booklet Common Myths About Microbes from this issue. Somdatta leads science communication and public outreach efforts at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, Hyderabad. She is also part of the Superheroes Against Superbugs initiative, which aims to inform on antibiotic resistance in the country. Somdatta, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Vijeta, for the kind invite.
Thank you. Before we move further, let me quickly explain the format of today's discussion to everybody. In the first 30 minutes, I'm going to ask Somdatta some questions from the booklet. All of you who have joined us today are requested to please type your questions in the chat box. In the next 30 minutes, we will select a few questions from the chat box for Somdatta to answer. All right, Somdatta, shall we begin?
Yes, Vijeta.
Okay. Somdatta, first of all, thank you again for joining us. We have shared your booklet with all our readers, but could you also tell us a little bit about it in 1 or 2 lines?
Yeah, so basically, I wrote this booklet pretty much in the early few months of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in my position at CCMB, I was coming across a lot of people who were quite confused or had misconceptions around microbes. So I thought that I Wonder offered that correct opportunity to talk about microbes and the different facets, not only the facet that they are infectious or can cause diseases, but also this good, bad, ugly, this like a plethora of things that microbes can offer. And this booklet is a very humble attempt in that direction.
That's amazing. It's really good that the general curiosity about microorganisms has increased in the wake of the pandemic. But I'm particularly interested in what you said just now, that there are various facets to these microorganisms besides the bad and ugly. It's not just all about disease and death, but there is good to our relationship with microorganisms as well. And your booklet highlights this while discussing a very common myth that all microorganisms are bad. Can you please tell us a bit more about this myth and why do you think it is so widespread?
Yeah, so let me start with why do I think it is so widespread. In my conversations with people around microbes, all that I, unless provoked, all that I hear from them is how they cause different diseases. And of course, in the last 6 months, it is very well known that even people who probably never studied biology now know about a virus which can cause a fatal disease. So most of the times, people who are beyond the realm of biology hear about microbes from a doctor. They hear about microorganisms in terms uh, of the potential of causing a disease. All the popular media around us, let's say the advertisements, talk about kill the germs, keep yourself clean. So the popular narrative is hugely around the villainous side of the microbes. On the other hand, it's not like we don't know about its good parts. I mean, I'm in Hyderabad, and the favorite food here are all fermented food. And of course, over centuries and centuries, we have been utilizing the bacteria and yeast for their superpower of making tasty food for us. And not only just microbes outside us, I mean, of course, microbes are also required for biodegradation and many other things in nature. Talking about the context of our bodies also. We do know that there are bacteria in our gut, which is called as E. coli, which also help in digestion. So our textbooks do carry this piece of information, but somehow the popular narrative around this is not too widespread, and probably that is also why we tend to we tend to miss this aspect. And what has happened in the last few decades is that we are understanding microbiome like never ever before because of the kinds of technologies that we have today. And um, and that has given us the opportunity to look at the many different cool things that microbes are capable of doing, and the kind of relationship our body shares with the microorganisms that live inside us, live on the surface of our body, and of course around our body. And like I personally found it extremely cool when I first heard about how microbes can really determine the metabolism of our bodies. And like there are different microbiota in people who are obese versus who are not obese, and that list just is growing day by day. Then like metabolism, moods, and so the coming probably decades are going to be all around microbiome and all kinds of things that they can do, and how we and microbes have co-evolved. And it is inevitable that we are going to live together, and we need to understand each other to be able to live together happily. So yeah, I mean, I personally think that there needs to be more conversations around microbiome, or microorganisms, so that we all understand how powerful these little chaps are, and also understand that we and them are actually one. I mean, our body contains more number of microbial cells than our own cells. So it is
Wow.
quite a kind of coexistence that you're talking about. So we do need to acknowledge that fact, and stop thinking that microorganisms are all bad. They're all causing diseases, because that is not the case. Most of them do not. So it's important to acknowledge.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And I like the fact that you pointed out the role of, popular media in showing villainous or, malicious looking microorganisms, and advertisements to kill them all. Whereas an advertisement of curd or cheese, where they play such an important role, there's not even a
Correct.
single mention about these
Right.
microorganisms.
Right.
So it's I think it's really important to have these discussions and to remind ourselves that microorganisms can have important, good, positive roles to play. And they're not just around us, they're inside us as well. I mean, we are coexisting with them, like you mentioned. Somnata, you talk about many more myths. There are totally 9 myths mentioned in your booklet. But before going into the rest of them, can you tell us a bit about your process? How did you identify these myths?
So much of it happened in two steps, I would say. Over the last 3 years, I have been a part of the initiative which is called Superheroes Against Superbugs, where I have been in conversations with a lot of school children and teachers around their understanding of microbes, and that has been happening in the context of discussing antibiotic resistance with them, of course. And it also happened that in the last 6 months, my position at CCMB also led me to talk to a lot of journalists or take care of a lot of social media content around the coronavirus or how the pandemic is spreading. So the myths that I have tried addressing in this booklet have arose from both the kinds of conversations that I have had. So, for example, the vaccine part that I have touched on in the book definitely comes from my conversations with journalists during the COVID times.
Okay. You mentioned about antibiotic resistance, and already you also stated earlier about how we co-evolve with microorganisms. So if I understand it right, there is a interrelationship happening between microorganisms, the medicines we take, and our human body, right?
Yeah.
So my next question is related to this interrelationship. And I think it is also related to the Superheroes Against Superbugs initiative. You talk about several myths related to taking medicines without consulting a doctor. For the benefit of our audience, let me quickly state what those myths are. So one myth was that sorry, okay, never mind. So there was a myth that stated that a single drug can kill all microorganisms, or that if I have a fever now, then I can take a medicine that was prescribed to my mother a week ago, something like that. And then there was also this myth that even if I have a viral fever, I'll just take an antibiotic just to be on the safe side. There are myths like this that you discuss, and these are some of the beliefs that people have when they take medicines. When they self-medicate. Yeah. Why do you think it is so important to consult a doctor?
Yeah. So, in the larger scheme of things, self-medication can definitely have issues like misdiagnosis, mistreatment, and those mistreatment can have very serious complications and consequences. Death is also one of them. And these cases are known. So that is one, definitely. The two, I think it's more important for us to acknowledge why do we think we can self-medicate. And often what happens is that we're only looking at the symptoms and we think, oh, we have a fever, so there's this set of medicines that we can take. Of course, there are medicines which people can take to take their body temperatures down. But then there are certain other medicines which are meant to cure you of the root cause of that disease. And those you cannot be taking, taking generally. Those are very specific and they depend on what kind of disease, kind of an infection, or what's the cause of actually you having that symptom, and that symptom could be fever in this case, let's say. So, and one of the things that I've observed in my conversations with people around microbes is they often do not understand, even though our textbooks probably from class 7 or 8 onwards, they talk about the microbial diversity. So they do talk about that there are 5 different broad groups of microorganisms. Yet people do not understand in the real, they do not really imbibe the differences that these microorganisms have. And somehow when it is disease, it is like disease germs, and there's no distinction in germs. And when we do not understand that there are these differences in the microorganisms, we definitely also do not understand that each of them will need a different category, different kind of a medicine as a drug to kill them, and one might not work on the other because that drug is particularly designed to only work on a certain kind of cell. And antibiotics, which brings me to the context of superheroes against superbugs, are a kind of drug which work only against bacterial cells, and bacterial cells are designed completely differently than, let's say, a viral cell or a fungal cell or an algal cell. And a drug which acts on a bacterial cell will not work on these other kinds of cells. And that appreciation, unfortunately, is lacking, and it is unfortunate, but we do hope that things change.
Yeah, and the initiative, the Superheroes and Superbugs initiative, is a step towards that direction. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, the problem of antibiotic resistance and superbugs is something that needs to be discussed even more. For the teachers listening in, how important do you think it is to have discussions like these, which bring the connection between what is learned in the classroom and the real world context that we face?
Yeah. So that actually ties me with the previous question. So one of the reasons why superheroes against superbugs is important, in our opinion, is also because we need to understand why there are these misconceptions. I mean, even though textbooks have these things, why are people not yet able to imbibe these things that textbooks anyway carry? And we do believe that probably there's something missing in the language that is used to pass that information. And what I'm trying to tell is that we need to figure out what should be the right mode of conversation that will help people to actually understand these things. And these will probably look different for different demography. So what might work in a village might not work in an urban setting, and what might work in a privileged urban setting might not work in an unprivileged urban setting. So all of these places, at all of these different places, we need to come up with different strategies of how to discuss microbes, how to discuss infections, how to discuss infection management, and antibiotic resistance is only one aspect of it. And for these to happen, we need grassroots movements to happen. And schools are one of the very potent places where these conversations can begin. And that is one of the reasons I strongly feel for schools to talk about the real life problems in their classrooms. And the number of problems that they can discuss are enormous. And it is up to the school to discuss and decide which problem is imminent for their own surroundings and how they want to engage themselves. And we are only helping here in identifying some of the problems that are out there and making it easier for them to work on it if they so wish.
And when you do this by busting myths, do you see that the impact is greater? How do they respond, and how does their attitude towards science change because of it?
So this is my personal opinion. It's not like I've done a quantitative assessment of this, but what I feel is that often I find people around me who think everything is known. Like, okay, so there are microbes, and then they do this, and this is what we need to do, and this is sorted. And when you bust these myths, they realize, oh, I didn't know about this, and there's so much that we do not know. And I personally think that that is the more important bit, that removing that feeling of knowing it all, because none of us know it all. I mean, we are not even close to knowing it all. And I think that is what is the most precious feeling for me in my work. If I can give the stakeholders that I work with a sense of being comfortable with not knowing it all. And busting the myths is an attempt in that direction.
That's a very, very beautiful message. And it's important to realize what you don't know, and that there is so much that there is unknown. shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about vaccines. In your interactions with students, how was their general attitude towards vaccines? Were they skeptical about it? And what were the kind of questions that you came across?
So actually, if you ask me about the school students that I have discussed these things with, they did not seem particularly wary of it. And most of these, I mean, all these students that I have spoken to about vaccines are all people from urban settings. So I'm assuming that because they have taken vaccines themselves, they're comfortable with the idea of vaccines. What became interesting for me was during the COVID times, and people started asking questions. So, what was the most interesting for me in the COVID times was that, and this you probably have also noticed in media, some of the well-known media houses were also confusing vaccines with drugs. What that became was that people were not able to distinguish between preventive measures, vaccines are one of them, and treatment strategies, drugs are one of them. So, and that is when I realized that, oh, even though people have been taking vaccines for so long, I mean, in India particularly, I mean, probably we don't have the issue as in the West as much about being skeptical of vaccines. We do take vaccines, but we do not know what the vaccines are doing. And that was very interesting and very timely because at this moment we really do need to understand what are these vaccines for. So, yeah.
So, is there a single most important message that you would like to give to all students, teachers, and their parents about vaccines?
Probably, I would like you to appreciate that vaccines are preventive measures, and so they help you not get a disease. It is not meant for curing a disease. So it does it. In the current times, probably it is pertinent to understand that a vaccine is not something that will help you after you have gotten the disease. It is something that helps you before the microbes infect you. So what basically happens is that if you have taken a vaccine and then if you get the infection against which you have taken the vaccine basically, then the vaccine is supposed to help you get rid of the infection quickly enough, and if you are able to do that, then you don't get the disease. So or you don't get it as severely as you could have gotten.
Yeah, it's a very important distinction to bear in mind. Now, I'm sure many teachers are interested to use your booklet in their classrooms.
That will make
Can
me
you
very,
Sorry?
that will make me very, very happy.
Oh, yeah, indeed. I mean, it's a great booklet. But can you suggest how it can be connected with the school curriculum? And if you have any suggestions about how to make this a fun activity so that the students really appreciate the diversity that exists in microbes?
So the booklet or the initiative, Superheroes Against Superbugs, is basically designed for. I mean, I called in the initiative because the booklet is inspired by the initiative as well. So the initiative is designed for students from grade 9 onwards. So what might make it even more fun to use the booklet is if the teachers out there can combine the booklet with your lesson plans when you're discussing microbial diversity, or and you can also find some of the games that we have on the superbugs.com, the website for the initiative. You'll find games which also will help you to again reinforce the fact that there are different kinds of microbes and they all have different characteristics and how they're different from each other. If you're also teaching evolution, for example, you'll find some we hope good lesson plans around that, and games that will help people understand how evolution works. And if you want to I mean, when you're talking about microbes in your classrooms, if you want to bring in the relevant the contemporary problems with microorganisms, then we definitely urge discussing antibiotic resistance, because it is definitely one of the most urgent public health issues that the entire world is facing, and yet not so much voices are around it, simply because many of us do not understand where the problem stems from. And so we hope that when you use this booklet, it creates the opportunity for you to raise all these kinds of discussions, and also probably evaluate the behavior of your classroom around these things. For example, the booklet as well as Superheroes Against Superbugs both talk about not self-medicating. And it will be very interesting if we can evaluate how this behavior is in the classroom before you do this lesson and after you do this lesson. It also talks about simple strategies like hand washing and how they prevent infection. And again, that was very interesting for me in my conversation or in our sessions of Superheroes Against Superbugs, where with so many students, I mean, they know that there are microbes on hands, and yet we do have an activity where we kind of play and show them that, okay, see, there are microbes on your hand, even, I mean, so basically the things on their hands which they could not see, and but they go away when you wash your hands. So there are those activities which we think, and the students also thought that they knew it, but yet we have presented in a way that is very revealing, and hopefully it will help many classrooms out there.
I'm sure the teachers would love to visit the website of the Superheroes Against Superbugs initiative to gather all these resources, and I'm sure that it's going to really help their classrooms and help the students. Somdata, I think
Yes.
we will now move to the questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll take this question from Anushka, who is a 6th grader. She says, I know about bacteriophages, and I would like to know why bacteria needs to give up resistance to antibiotics to be resistant to phages.
Okay. I don't think bacteria need to give up resistance to antibiotics to be resistant to phages. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about what are bacteriophages. So bacteriophages are viruses which can kill bacteria. Antibiotics are drugs, often which are produced by fungi, and some other bacteria can also produce antibiotics. So antibiotics are basically chemicals produced by a certain class of microbes to kill a certain other class of microbes, and here I'm talking about killing bacteria. So antibiotics kill bacteria and are produced by other microbial cells. So both bacteriophages and antibiotics are can help us in killing bacteria. So now that most of, I mean, over every single day we are finding superbugs. Superbugs means bacteria on which the antibiotics are not working. So if antibiotics are not working, then we need to find out other ways of killing these bacteria. So the other ways can involve finding other antibiotics, because there are so many kinds of microbes out there and we don't know about many other fungi, and maybe some other fungi is producing some other antibiotic which might be useful. That's one way of looking at it. Or we also can understand how bacterial cells divide, and or how bacterial cells work, and we can design a drug which can stop these bacterial cell functions or their growth. Or try using these bacteriophages, which are basically viruses, and these viruses can go and infect the bacterial cells and kill them eventually.
Thanks, Somdata.
I hope that helps.
Okay, we go to this. There's a question asking for the difference between a disease and a syndrome. Can you throw some light on that?
Okay. That's a difficult one for me. But a syndrome is basically a collection of a lot of different kinds of things, and so uh, it's a combination of symptoms, I would say, in a syndrome, and often one need not manifest all those symptoms, but it's like a plethora of different things, and you could be manifesting some of them. A disease is a disease. Your body is, if your body is at unease, then we call it a disease, as the name is, like lack of ease is disease.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. Um, there is a question about the production of vaccines. So this is from Anushka. Can you please explain the process of producing a vaccine and the efforts required to eradicate a virus?
So a virus can again be eradicated in many different ways. So one way is our immune system itself. So there are mechanisms in our own body which can identify anything foreign when it enters our body, and it tries to kill it. So that's the first line of defense that our body itself has. Two, when it is fighting a foreign thing, there are also cells that keep this memory for a later use. And so if you have a second time attack, then these cells will also fight like your first kinds of cells did, but these second kinds of cells are faster. So even before you get a disease, you might, I mean, your immune system might have killed it already. So this is what your immune system does. And there are, of course, other medicines also which can kill microorganisms. Just like I said, antibiotics kill bacterial cells. There are also antiviral drugs, which are basically molecules which can particularly go and break down the viral cells. But there are not as many antiviral drugs as many antibiotics we know. So that is one thing. Now coming to what are vaccines? Vaccines, one of the most prevalent, I mean, these days there are many different kinds of vaccines that people are trying to find. One of the easiest or the oldest strategies of making vaccines has been that let's say of a vaccine against a virus, then you inactivate the virus. What do you mean by inactivate? Is that you have taken away its power of causing the infection. So it cannot grow and multiply in your body, but otherwise it has its structure intact. So that kind of a vaccine is put inside your body by an injection. There are also other ways, let's say by an injection that has been put inside your body. And then your body's immune system is exposed to this virus. And just like I mentioned a little while back, how your immune system works is if it finds anything foreign inside the body, then it tries to fight and also remember. And that is exactly what the vaccine helps in. It induces your immunity to remember that, okay, there is this structure that had come. And if that comes in again, then the body is prepared to fight it quickly. So the infection will still happen, but will be also eradicated very quickly. What that will do is that even with those small number of viruses that might infect you in the real case scenario, because the vaccine is something that you have gotten yourself by your own will. But the infection happens without your own will, it just comes to you. But your body, because has seen the vaccine for that microbe earlier, already has memory of what it is and is also equipped to fight it quickly. So that's what the vaccine helps in.
Thank you, Somdatta. Now, talking about vaccines and our fight against COVID-19, there is this question from Saurav. We have started fighting against COVID-19. Seems an audacious attempt from humans that bypasses natural selection and denies harmonious existence among living beings. According to you, where are we heading?
I would like to be optimistic to think that these last many months have probably given us enough reason to stop and ask the question, and this is a very pertinent question, and hopefully also mend our ways wherever possible to again think of a more harmonious existence. But yes, the question is extremely difficult, and I don't think I have one right answer to this. Just like, okay, I mean, maybe all of us have some way of changing our lifestyles to become a little less, I mean, to reduce our consumption in some way and reduce our carbon footprint. Then, of course, there needs to be more science that needs to be understood, better technologies that needs to be developed, more inclusive technologies that need to be developed. That, according to me, is one of the most important things that often gets missing, because who develops the technology decides what kinds of technologies are produced. So can we have that inclusivity when we are developing solutions is probably one of the things that these last many months have forced me to think about, and think about very forcibly.
Yeah, and one of the articles in the latest issue also talks about how we even get in touch with, I mean, in this particular case, COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease, and we have a discussion on how we even contract such diseases in the first place, and a lot of it has to do with human activity and how it can be quite preventable in the future. And there is a very similar question to this end. This is a question from Mahesh. WHO has said we should be prepared for more pandemics in near future. So what are the precautionary measures every nation should take?
Yeah. So one of the things that we have learned a hard way is that we need better surveillance system in the country. And again, like, there is no one way of talking of what is the right surveillance system. So, I mean, are we talking about air surveillance? Are we talking about water surveillance, and whatever kinds of surveillance? Because microbes are just everywhere. But definitely there's a lot of talk happening around having better surveillance systems in the country, and there are also solutions proposed to that measure. It's not just talk happening. So hopefully that will happen. The other thing is, we have definitely been shown that a strong healthcare system is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And the country needs to figure out ways of how to deal with that. So, I mean, in this pandemic, a lot of us do think that we were just lucky that not so many deaths happened in India, though the infection numbers are huge. Uh, and we were just fortunate. The other pandemics might not be so merciful towards India, and that's something we need to be very, very cognizant of.
Okay, let's go to a different question. I'm going to club two questions here because I think they are very similar in nature. So Mahesh again asks that a virus is capable of many mutations. So how a vaccine can work for all mutations? And the other question that I want to combine with this, because I think the answers are going to be very similar, is why isn't there a vaccine for the common cold? So yeah.
So if a virus has many mutations, then a single vaccine does not work. So that is a very pertinent question, and it should be recognized. And that is also the reason why we do not have a mutation for a vaccine for a common cold, because the virus mutates so quickly. So every time, I mean, though you are getting infected by the virus, which causes common cold, the structure of the virus has altered enough that one single vaccine would not work. Having said that, there are attempts now, for example, for flu. Now, what they have started doing is they have started making seasonal vaccines. So basically, a particular strain of virus might be causing the flu in that season. So they make a vaccine, which is probably only going to be efficient in that season. By the time the next season of the flu comes, the virus would have changed again, and that would need another vaccine. So yes, so there are these kinds of possibilities also. But generally, a vaccine is made for some. I mean, a more efficient vaccine is one that is made for a more stable virus, one that does not mutate so much.
So the vaccine and immunity, going by that line of discussion, I'm going to ask the next question by Priyanka. For some diseases, our body develops immunity after getting infection once, like chickenpox. But it is not true for every disease, like typhoid, malaria. Why does it happen?
I do not have an answer to that. But a very generic answer that I can give is different microorganisms are presented to our immune systems in different ways, and not all of them can create immunity. And why that happens, there's no this we just do not understand enough. For example, again in COVID-19, that's been one of the biggest discussions around that. Will you get reinfection? For most viruses, yes, just like chickenpox, for example, we have now seen that reinfection does not happen, and but then there are so many other diseases in which reinfection does happen. So yeah, I mean it really depends. I mean it's a very case by case scene, and some of the things give you immunity to not get infections again, and some of them are not able to.
Yeah, it varies from case to case, and I guess it's always just found out
Yeah.
by case basis whether it's going to give us a lifelong immunity or not. Let's hope that COVID-19, in case of COVID-19, there is some good news in this respect at least. Well, yeah, that's just positive, just optimism from me. Okay, a slightly related question, I think, from Archana. Microbes grow and multiply insanely. Then why do microbes inside our body do not overgrow and harm us? Say we never suffer from overgrowth of gut bacteria, but suffer from overgrowth of mouth microbes.
Very, very interesting. So, one thing, I mean, because you talk about gut bacteria, we should also acknowledge that E. coli, if it is found in other parts of your body, can give you a disease. What it basically means, I mean, what we understand is that these are all possibly the results of co-evolving that we are seeing. So if our cells and these microbial cells have all through all these many years have co-evolved, so we are in many senses, and many scientists and thinkers also think of these as now we are all one. It's not like me and the microbes, it's like my body consists of also the microbes that live inside me and live on me. So you, I mean, and once you start thinking of it this way, I think it also changes our perception of how we look at these organisms which are residing inside our bodies. So so yeah, I mean basically I think it's a matter of how the processes of evolution has happened. But yes, I mean I think we should also acknowledge that it's not like they never overgrow or they never harm us. They do harm us. It's just about there's always a level of balance, and there's a right amount, right place kinds of things. And once that boundary is crossed, it can cause us problems.
The next question I have is also related to multiplication. This is from Spurti. How virus can get the information to replicate in the host cell?
So a virus often carries that information within itself in form of its genetic material. So, for example, in the current coronavirus, it contains an RNA, which is the ribonucleic acid, which contains this information, and it also contains the information on how it should go and use this RNA in the host cells to produce its own copies. So to cut the long story short, it is contained in its genetic material. For some viruses it can be the RNA, for some other viruses it can be the DNA, just as our cells contain DNA.
Thank you, Somdata. Okay, there is this interesting question from Anushka. When in the process of creating fermented foods, such as cheese, how do the microbes create the cheese? Do they die in the process, or is it just a chemical reaction? Please elaborate. Very interesting.
It is definitely a chemical reaction, and probably some of them also die, but I don't know how many of them die. Um, Many of these chemical reactions, these are definitely chemical reactions, and what happens is that these microbes create kinds of proteins which are called as enzymes, and these enzymes can be of many different kinds, and these enzymes react with if you're talking about cheese, then these enzymes react with the protein in the milk in a way that cheese is formed or curd is formed, and microbes grow here and they also die here. So yes. I'll just switch on the light and come, because I think it's getting quite dark in my room.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I understand this question. Okay, there's this question from Mahesh. What's your opinion that this pandemic will create a better awareness about microbiology as a career option among the general public? Usually people go to foreign universities to do R&D. So,
Okay. Let me say what I think might happen, and that might be related to a career or not. So I think the pandemic will definitely create a lot of conversation and buzz around having better healthcare system in the country. And when that happens, then of course all the things that require for a better healthcare will also find an impetus, hopefully. So that would be around R&D, that would be around technology development, that would be just around creating infrastructure. So I do believe that there's a good possibility of those opportunities coming up.
yeah, hopefully the increase in curiosity about microorganisms that this pandemic has created would bring something positive like this. There's a question from Rachna. Ma'am, can you share something about biowarfare?
So, biowarfare is something that people have been scared of. For example, when I was young, there was this enormous scare of anthrax, and so packets of anthrax where, I mean, people were worried that packets of anthrax would be found in our post boxes or wherever. So yes, I mean, that is something that people have been worried about, and we never know. I mean, people can make biowarfare. Yes, I mean, if that's the question. Will people be making it? I do not know. Should people be making it? I really don't think people should be making it.
Yeah. Okay, here's an interesting question from Simran. Is it due to these microorganisms? Okay, I think what she's referring to is the microorganisms in our body. I hope I got that right. Is it due to these microorganisms that the cancerous cells are overgrown and cause a dangerous disease? So is there a relationship between the microbes that are present in the body and cancer?
Yeah. So That's very interesting that you asked this. Not all cancers are caused by microbes, but there are cancers that we know that are caused by microbes. So, so why I find this interesting is what might, and by microbes actually I'm talking about viruses. I mean, there are viruses that we know that can cause certain kinds of cancers. And what I personally find interesting is what might it be that the virus also triggers, that our body in itself can also trigger in absence of a viral. I mean, if there are cancers that can be caused without a viral infection, then there is something common happening that is leading to cancers in both the outcomes, and that to me is very interesting. And a lot of researchers definitely study this. But yes, to Simran's question, there are kinds of cancers that can be caused by microbes and viruses, to be more particular. But not all cancers are caused by. Not every time that you have a cancer, it's not that it has been because of a microorganism.
Thanks, Samdata. Um, there's one question that I wanted to pose to you. You've spoken about the ways microorganisms that already exist can be beneficial to us. But can you say more specific, give more examples of how we have used microorganisms for various purposes? You've already mentioned food, but can you give more examples in that direction?
How we have used microorganisms for betterment?
What are the... Yes.
Antibiotics, like a pet thing. Antibiotics, huge number of them are made by microorganisms, and now we make a lot of antibiotics in the industries, but their structures are inspired by naturally producing antibiotics still. So so it's basically so discovery of antibiotics happened serendipitously, and that happened simply because we were interested in understanding microorganisms, their physiology, their growth better. And in process, we ended up finding something that ended up being useful to us. And then, for example, these days, you have advertisements for all these biotic products, epigamia, and all the probiotic products, as they call it. So again, that comes through the understanding of which microorganisms are useful to us, and we are getting into that zone where we are selectively adding the microorganisms that we think or we know are helpful to us, and we are eating them. And soon we'll probably be doing a lot of different kinds of things as either preventive measures or treatment measures. That probably is coming.
Thank you, Samdata. One more question to you. One aspect that is poorly understood in the school science curriculum is microbes in built environments. Perhaps this is why the idea of fomites come as a surprise to many. Could you comment on how human-built environments, the materials we use, etc., shape the microbes we find on physical surfaces in homes and schools?
So I think this is like an extremely broad question. But the two things that come to my mind is, for example, how porous your structures are. I mean, the kind of material that you're using, the more porous it is, the greater surface microbes will find a place for themselves. So versus something which is shiny, not shiny, but for example, stainless steel, for places where you want to have completely sanitized places, you would build things with stainless steel. The tables would be of stainless steel, stuff like that. So there, the microbes would not find so much places to live on the corners. Then, of course, like the kinds of cleaning practices that you have will also determine the microbiota of that place. one of the things that was in discussion lately was, uh, for example, a lot of us use things like Lysol for cleaning our houses. So, do we really need to have such stringent cleaning practices all the time? And this is a very difficult question to answer. So, on one hand, in regular times, we think that it kills a lot of microbiota, and that microbiota probably need not be killed. And why does it need not be killed is, for some of the instances, we do think that there are helpful bacteria or helpful microbes which are also dying because of this. We also know that there are a lot of microbes that we do not even understand, and they are getting killed because of this, and we do not even know how this is going to impact us. So both exist. The other thing is that now, in the current situation, for example, you know there's a pandemic going around, and you do know that you don't want to get that infection, and you want to sanitize everything. So as a human being who wants to not get that infection and die or become a spreader, uh, you also, there is this perennial dilemma of how much of sanitization we want to do. So, and that is an ongoing debate. But yes, I mean, one of the things that is why probably people also, people who think or who believe of using the lifestyles of older times also stems, I mean, many of them also believe in this, that if you use natural material, then you are staying closer to the microbiota that we are generally used to. So, and but at the same time, if you come to know that a certain microbiota from that population is disease, then you also want to kill those. I mean, was I clear? I mean, probably I went around with circles at some
No, I
point.
think it's just it's a valid answer, and like you said, the question was pretty broad. I guess it's just important to be aware of what you're doing and the science behind the various preventive measures that we are using in the current times. Why do we clean surfaces? Why are we being especially stringent in these times? These are some of the things that I think it's good to understand in the long run as well. Okay, now we have a few more questions coming from the audience. This is from Anushka. Ma'am, in your article, you mentioned that some fungi and algae are too large to be called microbes. Then under what category do those large microbes come under?
Such a sweet question. We just don't call them microbes. We just call them algae and fungi. For example, the mushroom that you eat is a fungus, and by no measure I can call it a microorganism. It is an organism. It is a fungus.
Yeah, I think I can remember going back in school, having all of these categorizations to
Yeah.
memorize, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you bring up, Vijeta. And because Anushka is in grade 6, maybe I can sermonize a bit here. That all these categories are just made for us, for our own convenience. Like nobody else has made these categories, and we categorize them so that we can understand certain characteristic in a broad way. And if a certain thing or something does not fit into that category, that's completely fine. It's nobody's fault.
Yeah. Okay, there is a question from Mahesh, and this is related to our earlier discussion on how stringent should we be about killing organisms and things like that. Okay, this is a question from Mahesh. How safe is RO water? Is it really good, or it kills even the good microbes? Is boiling water better than RO?
Yeah, so boiling or RO or any UV radiation, they are not selective about which microbe they'll kill. I mean, anything that can be killed with the UV or boiling will be killed. So that will include good, bad, ugly, all kinds of microbes. Now, if but then again, so that's the thing. So why did we start boiling water? And there have been enough epidemics that we have all seen in India. I mean, at least people who grew up in my generation probably have seen enough number of people getting jaundice, typhoid, and blah blah blah. And that is where probably our push for boiling water came from. And if that is a danger, then that is a solution that you have to take.
Again, a similar question from Simran. I have often heard a saying that at least once in a week, we should clean the floors with salt. Okay, so is it true or just a myth? Okay, this is a myth question. Okay, yeah, what's your answer?
I have no idea. I have not heard this, but a large part of my family has been washing vegetables with salt water in these last few months. So yes, I mean that has been something that people have been following, and it can help in better cleaning. And I can also imagine why it can help in better cleaning, because salt can help increase the surface area and can help clean things better. But is it really necessary to clean the floor with salt? Or I mean, it probably is just one's choice.
Yeah, I guess there are a few things that we still don't understand very well, and I think it is important to ask such questions that to understand if what we are practicing is based on science or is it just a myth. And I think it's a good question to bring up. Okay, I think, is it okay, Somnata, if I ask just maybe one last question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe two, if that's all right. Yeah. Okay, so one question is from Rachana. Is coronavirus a new discovery or was it known before too?
So there are other kinds of coronaviruses that we are already aware of. This is the fifth coronavirus that we have come to know of. Fifth or seventh? I can't remember now. But the famous ones, for example, the SARS outbreak and the MERS outbreak that happened in the 2000s were all coronaviruses. In addition, there are other coronaviruses that live inside our own body. So and because they live, I mean they're known to live in our body. They don't even cause us severe diseases. So there are all kinds of coronaviruses out there, and these are only the ones that we have found out so far. There are probably tons of others which are yet to be discovered by us. But yeah, I mean, so coronaviruses are of many kinds, and this is not the first coronavirus that we have understood or we have seen. And there are coronaviruses that can cause very, very fatal disease, like SARS and MERS were. There can be coronavirus which can cause very infectious but not as fatal disease as the current coronavirus. And there are also coronaviruses which do not cause us diseases.
Thank you, Somnata. So one last question, and I'm really interested to know the answer. This is from Mahesh. Do you have any future plans of writing a popular science book like the microbes within us and a grander view of life? What an idea.
I'm flattered by the thought, but I think at the moment Ed Yong has done a fantastic job of writing the book "I Contain Multitudes." So maybe like what I might be fascinated thinking about is the kinds of conversations that I have with people around microbes, and maybe an Indian, and especially the young Indian perspective of microbes. I don't think I'm going to write a book because that's not really my way of expression, but maybe something else.
Thank you, Somdata. Indeed, your public outreach efforts are incredible, and we all wish you all the best for more such endeavors and initiatives. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to all of you who joined us today. You've been a great audience. I hope you found this session useful. And do join us again next month on the 9th of December for our next webinar. And if you're interested to receive a
Thank you so
print
much,
version
Vijayata.
of... I'm sorry?
Your voice was breaking.
Oh, is it? Okay, I was just rounding up. So the final message was that come again for our webinar next month, which is going to be on 9th December. And please subscribe to us if you're interested in receiving updates on webinars, the latest issues, or receiving a free copy of the magazine in print version. Thank you.
Thank you very much.